All right, how's it going, everyone? We have another episode of the Growth by Shawn podcast today. I get to sit down with a mutual friend of mine who is Sam Forget. He is a nutrition coach, the owner of samforget.com, and the host of Transformation Talks. Sam is a lifestyle coach, I want to say. I don't want to create like his coaching name for himself, but the way I view Sam, he helps everyday people make very drastic but realistic changes in their diet and lifestyle. So, Sam, I want you to just introduce yourself, a little bit about you, and kind of what you do, and we'll go from there.
Of course, man. Well, first of all, I appreciate you having me on, and you are not far off in saying lifestyle coach in a way, not a life coach. I don't claim to be that. No. But when it comes to the lifestyle coaching side of things, that's essentially life outside of the gym. So my background, and we can get into this a little bit, but my background is in personal training. That's how I first started. I was actually driving to my clients' houses. I was lugging equipment in and out of their houses, conducting the sessions, and doing my absolute best as a teenage trainer to get these people results. But what I found over time was that no matter what we did during the workouts, even if somebody's with me 3-4 hours per week, well, they have 163, 164, 165 other hours to, I say screw up loosely here, but to make some not great decisions outside of our workouts. So if we didn't start focusing on that, then the changes they were after, this isn't to say the workouts are not extremely important, of course, but when you're looking at the other 97, 98% of your week, we also need to place a huge priority on that stuff as well, which is where I started doing a little bit more of that life outside of the gym. So helping people more with nutrition, asking them questions about their sleep hygiene, asking them about their stress management, kind of giving them homework for that stuff. And that eventually evolved into what I didn't really know what it was at the time, but hybrid training, where I was offering almost online services on top of the sessions that I was doing in person, just out of necessity, because I wanted to see people get those results. And that's great. We crushed the workout, but what are you eating an hour after I leave your house? What are you doing this weekend? We want to kind of get a handle on that stuff. And to make the next 8 years of a story short, I eventually went fully online, doing both, programming and the nutritional side of things. And more recently, over the last 2 years, because of all the reasons I mentioned, niche down more specifically into, I would say, nutrition coaching, but as you mentioned, Shawn, lifestyle coaching on top of that. So just everything that's happening outside of your workouts that plays such a big role in whether or not you're getting those results.
Now, we talked briefly right before this about samforget.com into Hercules Performance. And it sounds like you kind of started with, hey, I want to train all the meatheads and get them like big and huge. So when did you start to make the transition of, hey, you know what, this might not be for me. I'd rather help more like an everyday person start to change their life?
It's a great question, because there were almost two separate transitional periods. There was the logistical side of things where when I'm 16, 17, when I started training people, there isn't an NBA athlete or a professional bodybuilder who wants some, know-it-all 17-year-old kid to train them. So out of necessity, that and going to the at-home model where I was driving to people's houses, that's who you end up working with anyway. But likely in the back of my mind at that time, I felt like this is a transitional period. Eventually, I will go to working with the people that I thought I would be most interested in, which is people who want to get really, really jacked and people who want to perform really well athletically. But over time, I realized the people I truly enjoyed working with were more of what we would consider to be your everyday people who didn't care about being 6% body fat or having 20-inch biceps or, doing a 360 windmill or anything like that. So I would say, yeah, those two separate transitional periods where at first it was out of necessity, where that's just who I was working with. I wouldn't say I was necessarily fully bought into that being the long-term play, but then hundreds of sessions later, I'm like, this is awesome to hear these wins from people, the everyday life, things you wouldn't necessarily think about, though it's a cliche, but the non-scale wins or victories ended up being so much more satisfying to me, where somebody comes to me and says, well, for the first time ever, I didn't excuse myself out of a group family photo because I love the way I look now. Or I'm able to run around, another classic example, I'm able to run around with my kids and kick a soccer ball in the backyard and not feel like I'm completely gassed. That was the stuff that ended up firing me up. So again, fast forwarding a little bit now, Hercules Performance, which was my, my initial business name, that officially launched in 2014. And now in 2022, I'm in the beginning stages of a little bit of a rebrand. I haven't solidified what the end game looks like. I just know that Hercules Performance doesn't represent what I do or who I help anymore. And so it can be a little misleading. But yeah, there were a few transitional periods in there.
I see. So seeing as how you started in the fitness space around 16, 17, the reason that a lot of us stick with this is our main goal is to help others. So even before 16, 17, or even at that age, was that like in the back of your mind, like this is the reasoning behind why I'm starting to get into the fitness space, or were there other reasons of why you started to get into it?
I would say it was a big part of it, because what actually ended up happening, basketball was my thing. I was super passionate about that, and all the fitness and nutrition effort that I was putting in at that time revolved around being a better basketball player. Specifically, I didn't realize that a lot of 6'1" white kids, end up in the NBA. So at the time, I was still all in on that. And as a result, it ended up being a lot of people near my hometown who would say like, hey, will you help train my kid for basketball kind of thing? So it was a mix of some sport specific training, but also the sessions on the strength and conditioning. And I say that loosely. I was not much of a coach then, but on the strength and conditioning side of things to get them ready. So it was certainly wanting to help other people, especially people with similar goals to me at the time. But honestly, from an extremely young age, Shawn, I knew that I wanted to do something in fitness, something with workouts, something with health. I didn't know what that would look like yet, because obviously a teenager doesn't have the life or professional experience to know what those vehicles can be in order to help people. But I was very fortunate in that at a very, very young age, again, not only did I know I wanted to do this, but I had great examples around me, because in the workout side of things, my dad would get home every single night, go downstairs, he's deadlifting, he's squatting, he's benching. And 7-year-old Sam said, oh, I guess that's just what adults do. Like, that's just the thing. They do that. And on the nutritional side of things, my mom is really good about, she didn't like ban foods from our house or anything like that, but she didn't have this pantry full of chips and soda and donuts and all these things that I absolutely would have gravitated toward. So to answer your question more directly, I would say it was a little bit of a mix of, yes, I certainly wanted to help people, and I got a taste of that specifically with the basketball kind of training I was doing early on. But I also knew nothing else. That was the only option in my young brain, was to help people with this workout fitness stuff, whatever that ended up looking like.
Okay. So now I want to just go right into some of my questions that I kind of have lined up here, because now I listen to your podcast, Transformation Talks. I follow you on Instagram. I'm actually on your email list. And throughout all of these things, I've noticed that you're just a great communicator and a great storyteller. Now, can you kind of help me understand how you got to such a level of being this great communicator, in a way of like really drawing someone into, hey, this is me and this is what I'm talking about, and helping someone understand like why this is so important?
Let me just say, Shawn, before I answer that, you made my day with that feedback. Really, I appreciate that, because writing to me is my absolute, podcasting I'm really enjoying, but writing specifically is something I started doing very early on. I was 18, 19, a freshman in college, and started putting out articles. Now, they were not good articles. Looking back on them now, I'm like, wow, I can't believe somebody let me publish this stuff. But what ended up happening was that I had great mentors who taught me that when it comes to, it's kind of the idea of what's called infotainment. So I can sit here and write an article that says 5 reasons that carbs aren't fattening. Nobody's going to click on that. That's a snooze fest. And not that the goal, of course, is to exclusively get clicks, but if we actually want to educate people, we almost need to sneak it in the form of entertainment. So instead of me saying, and again, I was fortunate to have some great mentors, I should say, and learn this early on, instead of me writing this very dry, boring, carbs get stored as glycogen and they attach to water molecules, and that's why the scale goes up, I could say, let me tell you a story about my friend Shawn, who for the first time ever didn't avoid his favorite pasta or bread or bagels in the morning and ended up losing 45 pounds. Let me tell you that story. And the second people hear that in story form, they're much more engaged. That's interesting. And the fitnessy science stuff is almost sprinkled in. So it still gets the job done where I'm successfully, ideally, helping people and getting a point across or convincing people to pursue a certain approach, but it's done in a much more enjoyable way that's much more, ideally, again, welcoming and inviting. So it's kind of blending those between, like I said, infotainment. Ideally, I'm delivering information in a way that's entertaining, where it's not so dry that you're not interested in consuming that.
Okay. So how important was it for you throughout your personal life and career to have those mentors? Kind of an open-ended question there, but
yeah, for sure. The biggest thing I think with investing in a coach, a mentor in any capacity, is that it accelerates your growth. It accelerates, I want to say skip the learning curve, but my first investment was with a gentleman named Mike Samuels, who at the time had an online fitness business and was transitioning a little bit more into the copywriting side of things. So essentially helping people write persuasive words, whether it's to get people to sign up for a program, whether it's just really great content, whether it's an article. And last me train. Oh, in terms of the mentors, excuse me. But the thing with Mike is the things he taught me in 6 months of me investing in, I think it was a Facebook group, is how he delivered that service, would have likely taken me 2.5, 3, 4, I don't even know how many years to figure out on my own, because I absolutely would have failed way more often independently. And that learning curve would have been dramatically steeper and dramatically longer. So yeah, I could have Googled the stuff that Mike was teaching me. I could have found it elsewhere. But the thing with investing in a coach, a mentor, a program, anything like that, is it accelerates it in such a major way, where Mike took what would have been a 3-year trajectory for me getting people to actually sign up for my program so I could help them. And in 12 weeks, all of a sudden, people were actually interested in what I was having to say about health and fitness. So I'd say that's the biggest thing in general, would be you can just mirror what somebody who's already done the thing that you're looking to do is, and then you accelerate the entire process.
Now, at what age did you hire Mike at first?
I was probably, I don't know if it was the tail end of college, maybe 20, 21, if not shortly after, because again, I was training people in high school, not very well, but I was doing it. But the business officially started when I was maybe 18, 19 as a freshman in college. And as you and I were talking about off air, I was not much of a college woo-woo night out kind of guy. If that's your thing, that's your thing. That wasn't for me. So immediately I'm looking at, how can I make this a real business? Not just a kid who's showing up to your basement with a pair of dumbbells. That's great. And that has a lot of value, but I need to find a way to make this a real thing. And that's when I was starting to do that hybrid method. So I would say I was on the younger side for that, just because what I had envisioned for my life, I kind of skipped the 4 years of partying, which again, no judgment. People want to do their thing. Great memories for some people. That's just not, that's not up my alley. So it was a little bit earlier, I'd say.
Yeah. I mean, I did that. I did the 4 years of partying, and I don't regret
it.
It was fun. It was fun, it was.
Which is great.
It's just interesting to me to see at such a young age, have someone invest in their self so early. It's not that it's unheard of, but it's fulfilling and rewarding for me to hear things like that, especially for someone that might even be around that age, thinking about, oh, you know what, where do I want to start to take my life? So was there any part of you, especially at like a young age, where you had to kind of put your ego aside a little bit and say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to be able to do this myself. Let me go and hire someone else to do it with me?
Big time. When I just look at the data at the time, business wise, of how many clients I had, or what kind of traffic my website was getting, I had the data to show it's growing and it's fine, but not at the rate that I want. I'm not reaching people. I'm not helping people at the capacity that I want, at the volume that I want. So it's the cliche of nothing changes, nothing changes. So yes, there was ego involved, and I'd like to sit there at 19 thinking I can figure out how to build this massive health and fitness empire on my own. But I have a few years of, again, data to show that no, I can't. And yes, some of it was I was just young. And I think with experience and age, some business was going to come my way anyway. But yeah, to answer your question more directly, again, that the ego side of things, if I had let that be a hurdle or a point of friction for me of, no, I just, I can figure, actually, bear with me. I'm kind of on a few different places right here,
No, it's
but
okay.
something I hear all the time when people are considering investing in a coaching program is, I'm going to try this on my own a little bit longer. And then if I really need help, if I really can't figure it out, then I'll come back and revisit this. And this isn't just, my services. I see this happen in a lot of spaces, whether it's writing coaching, nutrition coaching, business coaching. And my challenge to anybody thinking that way, myself included, a younger version of myself, is if that were true and things were possible to, it was possible for things to go well on your own, you wouldn't be having that conversation. You wouldn't be considering signing up for the service. The reason that you were there in the first place is because things have not been going super well on your own. So for me, hiring Mike, that was a no-brainer, because I could sit here and say, oh, $150 a month, which looking back was dirt cheap for the return I got on that. But, $150 a month for a Facebook group, that's kind of a lot. I could probably do this on my own. That's where I had to look at myself and say, look, dummy, you haven't figured it out on your own. That's why you need to put your ego aside and pull the trigger on something like this, because obviously the upside is so tremendous.
So looking back on that now to where you are today, were there other moments where you also had to put that ego aside and say, oh, you know what? I don't think that I'm going to be able to do this. Let me go and figure out a different way. How have you kind of managed those? I shouldn't say manage. How have you become a little bit more self-aware in that aspect?
I would say the biggest thing would be when I'm operating in my comfort zone too often, or like over the course of a week, if none of the things that I'm doing, and here's the cliche, right? If nothing scares you, it doesn't change you. And, good things happen outside of your comfort zone. And I largely believe in that. I do, as an aside, think a lot of good stuff does happen completely within your comfort zone. You don't always have to venture out. But when it comes to having to put ego aside at each level of business for me, at each iteration of my business, if I didn't identify, I'm really, really comfortable with what I'm doing right now, but that means there's a gap. For example, starting a podcast, this is a great example. Starting a podcast, talk about, shattering my ego. The reason I didn't start a podcast way sooner, because I have a great network of people. I know some absolute all-stars in the industry that, they make this massive impact and they're absolutely wonderful. Why would I not do a podcast? Well, for years it was because of my ego. If I put out a crappy Instagram post, I can archive it. I can go back and edit it. If I do an Instagram story, it's gone in 24 hours. If I write this crazy long article, which I did in 2013, 2014, and it's absolute trash, guess what? I go back and edit it, and that's it. When it comes to podcasting specifically, the second I hit record, and yes, you can make some adjustments, you can crop things out, you can edit a little bit. But generally speaking, to me, podcasting is the least forgiving media, where if you and I are recording right here and I get tongue tied like I did a few minutes ago, that's it. Like, it's out there. And yeah, I could say, please crop that out, but that doesn't feel as authentic or true to the content that's actually happening there. So when it comes to how important that's been in overall growth, I think, okay, I'm feeling pretty comfortable right now. That's a little bit of a red flag, because if I don't put myself in positions to honestly be really bad at something, like my initial podcasts were, not great. And ideally I'll look back on the ones I'm doing now and think the same thing 6 months or 12 months from now. You end up limiting your growth in such a major way. So yeah, I would say that's a big thing, is when you're extremely comfortable, that's a little bit of a red flag, because if you're not putting yourself in positions to be, again, really bad at something, you're going to end up limiting your growth in a way.
I love that answer. The way that I was kind of taught about it when I first started the podcast was, when you're watching a television series and the first season has 10 episodes, right? Every episode isn't going to be like the best episode. You're looking at the season, you're not necessarily looking at the episode. And that's what kind of helped me get started. Which is a little different way of thinking than you had gotten started, but still, I'm kind of overcoming those, overcoming those limiting beliefs that you may have. I wanted to backtrack for a second just about the communication that we had started with, but I wanted to know how important it is for you to communicate with your clients, not in terms of like how many days a week you're communicating, but the way that you come across in order to help them understand this is why we're doing what we're doing.
Oh my God, that's such a good question. And any of my clients who happen to be listening can tell you that I am a stickler for language. My check-ins are not, I'm proud to say they are not, hey, how'd your week go? Oh, great. Let me know if you need anything. Not that at all. If I reach out to you and say, how'd your weekend go? And you say, not great. I didn't make the best choices, but it's a new week. Pause. We're going to go way, way deeper. This is not a surface level program. Tell me what you mean by not great choices. For example, that person may think just because they had a donut, that was a bad choice. Where I would say, actually, that's a part of a really well-rounded program, a plan nutritionally. And I love donut. That's not a bad choice at all. So we might dissect that. Or the vagueness of, but it's a new week. What does that mean? What are you going to do different? Tell me exactly. I'm going to eat better. When, how, when are you going to the grocery store? What are you prepping? What does that actually look like? So to your point, Shawn, the frequency of the check-ins doesn't necessarily, I want to say it doesn't matter beyond a certain point. You want to be checking in fairly often, but it's the content and the delivery within those where you are challenging people to be more specific and committal with their language. And here's the hard part. Holding people accountable. And that gets thrown out. And I have done whole podcasts on this. When it comes to accountability, everybody says up front, yeah, I want you to hold me accountable. I want you to yell at me when I make a bad choice. First of all, if you're looking for someone to yell at you, I'm not your guy. But what does holding somebody accountable actually look like when it comes to effective communication? That's when you might sit here, Shawn, as my client and say, well, I didn't eat well this week, but things were nuts at home and work was super overwhelming. The last thing I wanted to think about was food. That's fine. But, and this is the difficult part when it comes to communication, for us to achieve the outcomes you're after, we have to get a little more specific. So I understand that work was nuts this week, but are you open to feedback? For example, did you get home an hour later than usual? If so, let's talk about some really easy on-the-go options that are available to you in your area. Or what's your typical takeout spot? Let's look at that menu together and troubleshoot that a little bit. And not everybody loves that at first. Some people are, they just want to kind of write off the week as a whole. But if you can get very specific, if you can get very clear, if people are receptive to the accountability that they claim to want, because it's always incredibly inconvenient and annoying to be held accountable. When people sign up for coaching in general, it's when they're motivated, they're fired up, and they're like, let's do this thing. And then 14 days later, when I say, hey, your protein is low again this weekend, I know, that's where the communication becomes more important for when the novelty wears off. So there's continued buy-in and there's no gray area whatsoever in terms of exactly what needs to get done to be able to achieve that outcome that you're after, no matter how we actually get there.
I love that. So when you have a client and they struggle with holding themselves accountable, and maybe that's why they hired you, something along those lines, what do you think some of the biggest struggles are when you have new clients, maybe like a month one? And I know that I'm making this broad because everyone's very individual, but what are some of the biggest struggles that you found personally in terms of communicating with someone that really isn't sure like how to communicate well with you month one versus like month 6 with you?
I would say early on, a lot of the communication revolves around setting really clear expectations and unlearning a lot of the preconceived notions about what the process will look like. So there's an expression, I forgot where I got it, that ambiguity causes anxiety. The most stressful thing to a new client is not knowing how and when that they can expect to progress, what the process will look like, where their hurdles are going to be. So in terms of the communication shift early on, it's me clarifying, no, you're not going to lose 15 pounds in the first month, or honestly, maybe even in the first 2 to 3 months as we get your habits in place before we actually enter that dieting period. And no, you don't have to cut out your carbs. And I know it's scary to reintroduce them because the scale is going to go up a little bit, but this is a great educational opportunity to explain scale science and why individual weigh-ins, for example, are completely useless. And then over time, that client at month 4, month 6, in my programs, one-on-one, we're looking at a 6 to 12 month minimum. And I've had clients on my roster from 2014, 2015. So I have some people who've been at it a while. And what ends up happening over time is the conversation shift to things that are a little more tactical or a little bit more nuanced because there is buy-in. Somebody who's lost 65 pounds and they feel great doing it. It's no longer me convincing them that it's okay here and there, of course, but it's no longer me convincing them it's okay to have carbs, or no, you're not going to lose 15 pounds a month. It might be a little bit more like my uncle gives me a really hard time every single time we go to eat. He really pressures me and says like, won't you live a little? And then we talk about communication strategies and setting boundaries with family members. So I find that again, early on, it's a little bit more setting expectations, kind of wiping the slate clean of the things this person may think. And not that I know everything, of course, but let's clear up the, carbs are fattening. I shouldn't eat late at night, all those myths. Let's get those so we have a clean slate. Now we know what to expect. And essentially, client to client, it's a matter of navigating which hurdles come up for them. Because I have some people, Shawn, that are like robots. 6 months in, they're groovy. They just need me to, stay up on their their data, check in, make sure they're eating well. You good? You good? Great. I have other people that, they might be unpacking their inability to not finish a plate because their parent used to give them a hard time growing up of their kids starving. It's selfish of you not finish your meal. And that may not come up till month 9. So that initial communication process, setting expectations, unlearning a little bit over time, it's a little bit more nuanced depending on what tends to come up for the client. Because everybody listening to this, you, me, we've gotten results in 2 to 6 month spans. It's that after that becomes more important. Where are you at in month 9? Are you back on square one because you didn't challenge and unpack some other stuff? Where are you at in month 12? Where are you at 2 years from now? That's the stuff that becomes a little bit more important and prevalent in the communication.
So what do you think the most difficult part is of you helping others unlearn certain habits and create new habits?
A lack of data to confirm whatever the hesitations are, that those are actually true. And allow me to give a specific example here. Let's say somebody has, I work with a lot of women in their 40s, 50s, 60s who have tried, whether it's Atkins, whether it's keto, whether it's Jenny Craig, a lot of things that have emphasized extremely low calorie totals or ridiculously low or no carb intake. And then I come in and say, actually, I want you to eat a calorie amount that looks visually scary to you on paper, or I want you to eat these foods that you've deemed or been told are bad or unhealthy your entire life. Well, at that moment, they have literally nothing to confirm besides my word, which hopefully carries a little weight. But aside from that, they have nothing to confirm that this is in fact true. But what ends up happening as we collect data, when I say data, I'm talking, their calorie range, their execution with that, their body weight averages, your biofeedback. So essentially how your body is responding, energy levels, craving, hunger, sleep quality, all of that. Now, when we're 6 weeks in or 8 weeks in, or down the line, 6 to 8 months in, I can point out and say, hey, look, I'm just going to use you as an example. All right, Shawn, let's pretend you were scared of carbs at first and you didn't want to eat all the calories I told you. We're now 6 months in, you barely feel like you're dieting. You have a bagel 3 or 4 times per week. And you're making great progress because look back, now look at this crazy change that we're seeing in your photos. Look at what we're seeing with your measurements. And that tends to be the biggest thing that allows people to officially unlearn is, all right, now I have proof that I can be more flexible than I think. Now I have proof that I can eat and should eat a little bit more than I initially thought, even if I have a fat loss specific goal. So yeah, that tends to be the big challenge early on. That's quickly eradicated if somebody is open to doing something a little bit different. And to kind of close this thought for people who are really hesitant, because understandably, I have people who've been told for 40, 50, 60 years, carbs are bad, carbs are fattening. And I come in, I can't expect somebody to completely believe that having white bread isn't going to add to their waistline right away. So when it comes to having that hesitation, again, it can take a little bit of time, but eventually it does make a big difference.
No, that's perfect. I understand. I'm just really big on habit building and trying to instill it in others. I feel like is always a challenge for a lot of fitness professionals, nutrition coaches, things like that. So I was just curious your thoughts on that. So moving forward with your coaching, you had said that it's a 6 to 12 month commitment for most people. I don't know if that's still like a exact measurement, but anyways, so how do you go from, because a lot of people get scared of the 6 to 12 month commitment. How do you help someone push through that frightenedness or that anxiousness that they may have into helping them commit to, say, the 6 to 12 month mark, as opposed to, oh, I just want to do like 1 to 3 months to try it out?
Try it out. Yeah, no, that
Yeah.
comes up a lot. That's another phenomenal question, Shawn. I would say it's two things. Number one is, again, to challenge previous at bats, previous attempts, because most people I work with have a fat loss goal specifically. So to use that example, okay, the last 24 fat loss specific programs that you've tried have not only had an end date where this program runs from, I'm going to make this up, July 1st to September 30th. Not only has it had an end date, but it's been extremely, extremely brief. And where has that left you? And yeah, these people may have gotten great results during those programs that are incredibly short, but if the program actually worked, they wouldn't be having that conversation with me. So sometimes it's a little bit of tough love where, because again, like you said, I've had people who are more like, oh, can I do a few months to try it kind of thing? And it's a completely understandable thought. It's a big investment. It's a big commitment. But when you have that deadline, when you have that hard end date to a program, kind of in the back of your mind, everything gets more stressful because like I mentioned before, when people hire me, they're fired up, they're motivated, they're ready to go. Inevitably, life happens, whether it's 6 weeks in or 4 months in, whatever the case is, and they may be selling their house when they didn't expect to. Maybe their kid's getting in a ton of trouble at school. Maybe they're going through a breakup and they didn't plan for that. And if you have a 3-month program, well, that little life hiccup could take up all of your mental bandwidth for 4 weeks. And now 2 out of 3 months in a very short program, you feel like the program's a wash. You might not even try for the last month because you're like, well, I blew it anyway. So you end up in that cycle of half committing to a lot of these short programs. So when you have a lengthier timeline where, I'm at this for a minimum of 6 months, now when frankly, you're just like completely off month 3 or month 4, it doesn't matter as much because now you have this longer runway where you don't feel rushed to not only get the results, but to change all the habits. Because honestly, a lot of people, we're looking at 30, 40, 50 years of really bad habits or preconceived notions. And we're expecting to completely get rid of all those with a 12-week fix or 30-day detox. That stuff's not happening. So we need that longer timeline. The other big difference in what allows people to create a little bit of buy-in here is I never say, and I'm always clear about the opposite. I don't do 6 and 12-month programs. I have 6 and 12-month minimums. Because even though these are lengthier timelines, if you think I signed up for Sam's 6-month program, well, at month 4.5 or month 5.5, if you feel like you're plateauing, which 99% of the time is not an actual plateau, maybe you're going to want to do, for most people, 1 of 2 things, either something drastic to go out with a bang to try to lose 10 pounds in the last 3 weeks, or you might wave the white flag and just say, you know what, there's only a few weeks left anyway. I'll try a new program after this one is over. So it's 2 things. It's challenging somebody's experience before with, you've done all these 21-day fix, 14-day reset. Where has that left you? So we have this longer timeline where things become dramatically less stressful, where you get to spend a little time working on building each habit or waiting for results. That way you actually get to keep the results. And then that subtle language thing where I do not have 6 and 12-month programs. And a 6-month minimum and a 12-month minimum. Which one of those options is a better fit for somebody? Obviously depends on their goals, what they're after, et cetera. But the second you have minimum in your head, you don't go, oh, this program's over on January 5th, and then all hope is lost if I didn't reach my goals. So I threw a lot at you there, but hopefully that.
No, I understand. Yeah, it's crazy how you can just say that one word switch and it can completely reframe like how you look at something. So more from a business standpoint, and I'm not trying to ask you about your quote unquote secrets, I'll say, but in terms of retaining a client, like let's say that they hit their, and I'll put this in quotations, goal body or goal weight, because our goals are always changing. But after you've helped someone and they feel as though, okay, now I've reached what I wanted to reach. And let's say it took less than the 6 months, less than the 12 months that they're already at for that minimum. How are you looking to continue to help that client and retain them as a client?
Great question after great question, Shawn. So the biggest thing is really setting an expectation early on that hiring a coach is not only for fat loss. So many people equate a coaching process and health and fitness in general, not just my services, to be, I'm spending money on a coach to see the scale go down. And if the scale is not going down, there is no longer value in this coaching dynamic. There is no longer value in this coaching process. So I will set the expectation early on that the typical trajectory with any client that I'm working with, again, most of whom have fat loss goals, And I use something called the phased approach, nutritional periodization, which is getting more and more popular, where we have a primer period where we get your habits in a good place to set you up for sustainable results. We have the progress period, which is where all the fun stuff happens. It's all the fat loss. And then we have the practice period. The practice period is the thing most people skip over. And one of the reasons why my clients not only stick with me a little bit longer, but tend to maintain their results much more effectively, is because the practice period is where we go through that gap, that missing phase for most people of, okay, you're really, really good at maintaining your body weight when you're using MyFitnessPal and putting your peanut butter on a scale. But are you absolutely terrified of the idea of deleting MyFitnessPal from your phone? You feel like you have no idea what to do anymore? Or what if we start removing some of these data points? And I'm a big believer in always tracking at least a little something, like the cliche, what gets measured gets managed. So I don't pull everything. But over time, we want to wean off to what life after dieting looks like. And the reason so many people don't get sustainable results is, again, they do even a longer program, even if it's a 4-month program, a 6-month program, and everything ends when they reach that, similar to you, Shawn, I'll put it in kind of quotations here, that goal body weight or that body composition that they're after. And that's it. What about that missing link? What about the part that most programs never go over? It's how to actually stay off of this stuff, how to feel comfortable with scale spikes when you're not tracking MyFitnessPal and knowing that it's not actual body fat. So from a more logistical perspective, it's setting that expectation very, very clear that the program is not over when you see some magical number on the scale. Because as an aside, when we gravitate toward a maintenance phase anyway, that all-time low body weight that you're after, that's going to go up 3, 5, 7 pounds, depending on how much muscle you have, hydration, workouts. It's not actual body fat being gained, but you're never going to maintain that all-time low that so many people are chasing. So when you have that expectation early on, it lends itself to a lengthier runway, which isn't inherently better. But when it comes to producing sustainable results, it is most certainly better. And then honestly, beyond that, because most clients sign up with a fat loss goal, ideally, eventually they reach that fat loss goal. And then it's a then what factor. We've gone through this practice period and I feel pretty comfortable maintaining my results. Well, this is why a lot of clients have stayed with me since 2014, 2015, 2016, is they come for the plan. They stay for the accountability and the support. They want somebody else to kind of worry about their nutrition. So I'm going to plug in my stuff, get Sam's feedback. I'm going to execute, and maintaining is actually a really, really underrated reason to work with a coach, because again, most of us have gotten results in short spans before. It's the after. So as an aside, I've had people hire me who've done really, really well on their own. Maybe they're down 50 pounds, 60 pounds, excuse me. And their only goal, Shawn, is I don't want to blow this. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it looks like to not only maintain my results, but have a goal that is not so scale driven or fat loss driven. What about eating for performance? That's something a lot of people don't think about. What about eating for muscle gain? What about, God forbid, consciously seeing the scale go up a little bit? How fast is too fast? What should I be looking for here? So the goals then beyond this practice period evolve to eating for performance, being almost entirely intuitive. Again, I like measuring at least a few things. More intuitive, where you're not relying on numerical feedback. Maybe it's to improve your digestive health, which should be an ongoing goal, but maybe it's even more of a focus now. So there's so many other things you can get out of nutrition that aren't just my measurements are going down, because that's only going to happen for so long. It's the other stuff. So yeah, most of my clients on average now have stayed with me for over a year. Like I have that 6 to 12 month minimum. The last time I updated, I like kind of calculated the average client tenure. It's certainly over a year. And I have a variety of clients on my roster who weight loss has not been the goal in a long time, which is super fun when you kind of graduate to that territory.
Yeah, I love that, because it's just a tough spot in the fitness and nutrition space. And I mean that by, we always have this one goal that we want to get to. I'll be happy when I can do this, when, as opposed to, I like to look at this as, okay, look at the past year. And if you had made this goal of, I want to lose 10 pounds, right? And let's say that you didn't get to that goal. Does that mean that you weren't happy at all during that entire past year? Like, I'm sure that you can think of a moment or two when you were happy. So I just like to look at that long-term aspect in terms of, once you reach that goal, how are we helping people continue to set new goals, set new expectations? So I love that. A little bit more. Yeah, go, please.
Sorry
please.
to interject.
No.
One last point, and I want to bring up something you said, Shawn. how people's goals tend to evolve over time and they don't anticipate that. So that's another kind of overlooked thing is you may hire me thinking that you are just completely hell-bent on being 8% body fat. Let's say somebody's a really high performer. And they're like, I really want to get lean one time in my life. And then they get to 12% and the goalposts kind of move a little bit because they think, well, what's required to get from 12 to 8 is actually a fairly drastic change in lifestyle and level of sacrifice. And if you're exactly like you said, Shawn, if you were putting this outcome-based goal on this massive pedestal that I'll be happy when, I'll be content when, I'll be fulfilled when, well, you're going to be beyond some fleeting pleasure and satisfaction. You're going to be very disappointed to find out that that's not actually where the fulfillment, the satisfaction comes from. It's from keeping promises to yourself, delayed gratification, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, the usual list of things. It's all of that stuff because the goal you sign up with me for month 1 is not the same goal that you're going to have in month 48. So I do want to, again, bring up a point that you made, which is that the goalposts do tend to move over time. And if you get too married to that outcome, you're going to feel like a failure. You're going to feel discouraged instead of just, as I say, riding the wave a little bit of, all right, well, my decision-making recently has been lending itself to a slightly different goal. And that's not to say quit when things get hard and just say, well, I don't care about fat loss because eating healthy is really hard. Like, I'm not saying do that, but a little bit more nuanced where those goalposts can shift a little bit.
I know we could go all about this for the day. I feel like, but I'll move right into my next question. A little bit more fun, a little bit more objective. I'm curious, just your thoughts on, let's say that the scale in terms of like your body weight scale didn't exist. Okay. Do you think that from either a coaching standpoint or just from the entire world standpoint, do you think we would be better off, or do you think we would be in a worse place without it?
Dude, you're throwing haymakers with your question. I love that. That's good. I've never thought about that hypothetical. So I have very strong feelings in the scale. And I think that the typical advice of, you're more than a number, smash the scale, that achieves the outcome of not really being stressed by the scale. But the scale is also a really valuable tool if you know how to use it well. So that just completely avoid it if it stresses you out kind of thing, it tends to be rooted in misinformation. For example, I think that if I eat a salad today, the scale is going to go down tomorrow. Or if the scale is up on a Monday, which it is for 99% of people, that I gain legitimate fat over the weekend. Neither of those things are true. So I feel very strongly about its value and that a lot of people miss out on the benefits of having it as a tool in the toolbox. And again, this could be an episode in itself, how to use the scale properly. But in terms of whether or not people would be better or worse off, I think a lot of that would depend on how heavily they then leaned on other sources of data. So for example, my clients, 95% of the time, I'm having them do monthly photos and measurements. If you took the scale away from us tomorrow, I'd be having them do photos, measurements, maybe even a greater emphasis in biofeedback, how they're feeling, how their clothes fit more often. So I'm like, so this is a lame ass answer, but I'm so torn because I think you're then hypothetically taking a really valuable tool from some people that could really benefit from it. But at the same time, some people do get really hell-bent on the scale and what it's doing. So placing a greater emphasis on that other stuff kind of makes it a little bit of a toss-up. I know that's a cop-out answer, but I have such feelings either way. That's a great question.
No, that's okay. I just wanted like something kind of fun to help wrap up with. The last thing I'll ask you, and I'm basically just taking this from your podcast with your Fast Five. I'm not gonna go and ask your Fast Five. I'm not gonna steal that from you. Let me just ask you what you would be doing if you weren't doing this.
Great question. I love when people use my own question.
Yeah, I mean, you always ask, so I'm like, this is how I'm gonna end it. I'm gonna throw the ball back in his court.
No, it's funny, Shawn. I went on my buddy Matt McLeod. He's a registered dietitian. He's wonderful. I went on his podcast and he gave me my full, I think it was still the quick 6 at the time. And I didn't have a good answer for anything. Here I am asking people, and for anybody listening who's never listened to my show before, I wrap up with the Fast Five, and this, Shawn, where it's 5 rapid fire non-fitness questions. And when it got flipped on me, Shawn, I had nothing. So your question, what would I be doing if I was not doing any sort of nutrition coaching? I would say one of two things, or the industries as a whole that I'm most interested in. Something with tattooing, though I don't know if it would necessarily be a tattoo artist specifically. My background actually, like in adolescence, was mostly art. That was my number one focus. If you asked me, pre-delusional NBA days, what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would actually say an artist. There are so many photos of me as a young kid with, literally wearing a beret, painting in my kitchen. That's, I wanted to do something with art. So I would say maybe something in the tattoo industry. I don't know whether that's managing a shop, whether that's, creating like an online media center for tattooing to connect people. There's stuff like that out there. Just being around that world is probably the thing. If you had asked me a tattoo question, you would lose 20 minutes of your life. It's probably the thing I'm most passionate about outside of this, but if not that, and another cop-out answer, because I'm giving you two answers here, something with animals, but specifically larger exotic animals. I see the way that, people are able to interact with, whether it's, a chimp or a gorilla or a jaguar or a cheetah or something like that. And I would feel so eager to participate in something like that, to be involved, obviously making sure the animals are in a good position. Zoos can obviously be 50-50 here, but something where I'm able to just be around animals in that capacity. One of the best experiences of my life, again, I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, is when I was in the Amazon rainforest with my buddy Malik. It was, we had left from Peru and we went to a place called Monkey Island. And it's exactly what it sounds like, where you walk around and I don't know what it was, a couple acres of monkeys just roaming freely. They'd hold your hand while you walk. They'd sit on your shoulder. And to this day, clearly I'm bringing it up now, like 4 years later, one of the best days of my life to be around animals in that capacity. So the much shorter version, because this is no longer fast five, is something in the tattoo industry or something with animals, but not necessarily animals you'd probably find in the average cul-de-sac.
Oh, wow. Yeah. If you've never seen Sam, and I'm going to make sure to tag him, and you'll be able to look at what Sam looks like, but Sam is covered in tattoos.
I get a long way to go, man. I still got
yeah, but your body is definitely a canvas, we would say. All right, last question, and I'll make sure that this is my last one. But I wanted to make sure that I ended with still a fitness nutrition question. So, what do you think is the biggest thing that someone can do starting today? Not starting tomorrow, starting today, right now, listening to this, that they can what was I saying? That they can do in order to start reaching their fitness and nutrition goals.
So
it's very broad. But
that's good.
Yeah.
So in terms of somebody trying to better their own health, or a fitness professional,
someone that's trying to better their own health.
Cop out answer number 3. I'm going to give you 2 options here. In the world of personal finance, people might be familiar with this. There are 2 very popular debt payoff strategies. One is called the snowball method. One is called the avalanche or top-down method. And for somebody who psychologically feels very overwhelmed with the amount of debt they have, they may start with the absolute smallest debt they have, even if it's not financially optimal. Even if they should start with a larger debt or a higher interest debt that they have, they might choose their $400 cell phone because it feels great to get that win. Once they do that, as the name suggests, you snowball to the bigger, typically higher interest debts. On the flip side, you could go the much more difficult route, which is technically financially optimal out of the gate, which is I'm going to knock out those large, high interest, whether it's a loan, whatever the debt is, right away. And that's more daunting, but it's also higher yields. So the argument for that method is that if you knock that out first, now you look at your $400 cell phone debt, the payoff for that, and you scoff at that. That's nothing. So when it comes to health and fitness specifically, I do think that most of the time we're told to start small. Drink a glass of water a day, walk 5 minutes around your neighborhood. And that's the equivalent of the snowball method, which is great. But obviously the ROI, the return on investment, is proportional. Or if you drink a glass of water a day, you're getting a glass of water a day results, which is maybe a little bit more morning energy, which is fine. But I find that for some people, honestly, a fair amount of people, we all tend to be, it's normal to be biased and to be extremely impatient with seeing a return on our efforts. So what happens is if you go all into that kind of snowball method, that start small, and you make 3 or 4 changes, that's great for building momentum. That's great for building self-efficacy and confidence. And I'm not ripping on that at all. That should be a constant. But I do think there's a case to be made for some people who feel a little overwhelmed with actually picking something that's a little more difficult out of the gate, that also produces a bigger win that then creates the buy-in for all the little stuff. So an example of this may be somebody who has not been working out in months. You're typically told what? Start small, go for that walk, do 2 at-home workouts. Well, if the program is intelligently designed, and that's a big if with a lot of programs floating around on the internet, but if the program is intelligently designed, some people may actually be better off going straight to 4 days per week. Now, these workouts should not be overly intense, overly lengthy. They need to be intelligently, everything from exercise selection to sequencing, make sure your recovery is in a good place. Well, guess what? If you get 16 to 18 workouts in the next month, as difficult as that may be, the amount of change, and I'm not saying you'll radically change your body in 30 days, but your confidence, your energy levels, your ability to kind of tolerate discomfort in so many ways. Oh my God, what else can I do? Maybe now it's eating a little bit better, putting the phone away before bed. So I'm not ripping on the start small advice, but I do think for some people, they end up in this constant state of starting so small and not sacrificing enough where they feel like they're dieting. Excuse me. They feel like they're dieting. They feel like they're making changes. They feel like they're putting effort in. And then they have what they feel like is nothing to show for it. So that some people may be better off doing that avalanche method. I'm going to pick something that's more daunting out of the gate, whether that's immediately tracking my food extremely accurately. I'm going to go from eating, 100 grams of protein a day, right up to 160 or 170 grams per day. And that's higher effort. But guess what? Now you're a lot more full. Now you're supporting more muscle growth or retention, depending on what your goal is. Now you're burning more calories during digestion. So mini rant there, but those
I understand. Yeah, it was a tough question just to kind of end off on. But I think the main thing, and I'm not trying to speak for you, but is just starting with something, not looking at the hill that you have to climb, but taking the first step, whether it's big, small, anything like that, just to kind of give a brief overview.
Dude, for sure. Yeah. Especially with podcasting, right? With you and I, because, you and I obviously have both, train and coach people in the gym. And if a client came to us and said, I'm going to get in shape first, and then I'm going to come back to that's what this is for. Or you and I with the podcasting, it might be, once I have a perfect episode, then I'm going to publish my first. That will literally never happen. So if your barrier for taking action is so irrationally high, taking action or remaining consistent, that's another little caveat that I'll add. So yes, you absolutely don't want that barrier to be, when things settle down in life, like I'll, do more, that's never going to happen. You're going to be selling your house. Your kids are going back to school. It's the holidays. It's the summer fun. There's something every time. But then for continued action, your barrier cannot be, or your prerequisite, I should say, cannot be, I've been perfect. Because here I am saying some people may be going straight to 4 workouts per week. That does not mean if during week 2, you missed day 2, I failed. No, keep going, get day 3 and day 4. And now you finish the month with 13 workouts. Instead of freaking 0, you're in a way better place. And the analogy I like to use here is like a hypothetical ladder. And a lot of people will try to go from the very bottom of the ladder and they just hustle their way to the top. And then the top might look like 4 perfect workouts and planning and tracking your nutrition and meal prepping. And the second they can't do all the things, they just jump off the ladder. Wait a minute. No, climb down a couple of rungs, get to, halfway up that ladder. And this to tie back, kind of wrap things up here with the earlier point of having hard data to show you that it's okay to be imperfect. Climb down a couple of rungs in the ladder. Give yourself some nutritional flexibility. Don't stress it. If you choose a date night over your workout, you should be doing that from time to time. And at the end of the month, look at the data that you should have. And it's going to show you, wow, I didn't have to be perfect across the board to see, even if your goal isn't fat loss, whatever your alternative goal is, you'll have something to show you that. We got fired up about this here.
No, I appreciate you just bringing everything back full circle. I feel like that's how a lot of episodes just tend to naturally go. So I really appreciate you coming on. You're an amazing speaker. Just to reiterate one more time, do you want to just mention where we can find you and what services exactly that you provide for everyone before we log off here?
Yeah, I'm happy to, man. So best place is samforget.com. My last name is spelled Forget. It is not pronounced forget. It is samforget.com. And that's kind of the home base where if you're interested in looking at the podcast, there's a link to it right at the top of the website. It's called Transformation Talks. It's on every single listening platform. All of my articles, which again, I've been putting out for 10 years. So if you have a question on something, there's an article for it. And then also my email list, because I'm a little sporadic with social media, but I'm always consistent with podcasting and writing. So again, if you go to sam4j.com, I have a ton of free stuff that I give away to new members of my email list. You can check out the podcast, check out the articles, infinite free stuff there. If you are interested in kind of leveling up a little bit, my coaching services. So I do a small group coaching program for women a couple of times per year. It's kind of taken different shapes and forms. And that's a shorter option, a lower barrier for some people. It's often 2 to 3 months, but the most popular by far is one-on-one coaching. And again, I'm calling it nutrition coaching, but you better believe we're going to be looking at, if you're on your phone before bed, you're managing your stress, all that other stuff. And that's certainly not a surface level program. So if you're looking for a set of macros in a weekly, good luck, not your guy. If you're ready to have your habits challenged, if you're open to that unlearning process we talked about, then the one-on-one stuff would be a good fit because it is far more intensive.
Awesome. So I hope everyone can follow Sam. If you need anything from him, please reach out to him or reach out to me. That way I could put you in contact with Sam. So that's going to wrap up today. So thank you everyone for listening.